Let me ask you something before we go any further. And I want you to actually sit with it, not rush past it the way we rush past most things. When was the last time you faced something that everyone around you faced too? The same loss, the same waiting, the same closed door, and you came out of it different. Not better off, not luckier, just different. Quieter inside, carrying something the others didn't seem to carry. Hold on to that, because that's the test, and it's already happened to you. My name is Walter. I've spent a long time now watching people in churches, in kitchens, in waiting rooms, in the back of buses, in towns I won't bother naming. And somewhere along the way, I stopped believing that life sorts people out by who suffers and who doesn't. Everybody suffers. The sorting happens somewhere else. It happens in what a person does with the suffering when no one's watching and no reward is promised. That's what I want to talk to you about today, especially if you're listening from somewhere in the United Kingdom, from a flat in Manchester, a terraced house in Leeds, a quiet street in Cardiff or Belfast, or some village in Kent where nothing ever seems to happen. I'll come back to why I'm speaking to you in particular. Stay with me. Here's the thing about a real test. The people taking it usually don't know it's a test. 8 billion of us are alive on this earth right now, and every single one of them, at some point, gets handed the same basic examination. It doesn't come on paper. It comes disguised as an ordinary bad day. It comes as the friend who betrays you, the money that doesn't arrive, the prayer that seems to hit the ceiling and fall back down. It comes as silence from God when you needed a voice most. And almost everyone reads that moment the same way. They read it as abandonment, as proof that they don't matter, as evidence that whatever they hoped about themselves was a childish fantasy. But a small number of people read it differently. Not because they're smarter, not because they're more deserving. Something in them just refuses to draw the obvious conclusion. Something in them keeps a small, stubborn light on in a room everyone else has already left dark. I've watched that. I've watched two people lose the exact same thing and become two completely different people on the other side of it. Let me tell you about a man named Job, because his whole story is this one test stretched out across a lifetime. You probably know the broad strokes. Job had everything and lost it: his wealth, his children, his health, all of it, in what feels like an afternoon. What people forget is how reasonable despair would have been for him. He wasn't being asked to stay cheerful about a minor setback. He'd lost his sons and daughters. His body was covered in sores. His own wife looked at him and said, in essence, just let go of your faith and die. That wasn't cruelty. That was mercy in her mind. She thought she was telling him to stop the bleeding, and his friends came and sat with him. And at first they did the only right thing in the whole book. They sat in the dust with him for 7 days and said nothing. Then they opened their mouths, and everything they said was an attempt to explain his suffering as a verdict. You must have done something. God is punishing you. There's a reason, and the reason is your fault. That's the test, right there. That is the test 8 billion people fail. The test is whether you accept the verdict that your pain is a sentence. Job wouldn't accept it. He argued. He complained loudly, bitterly, in language that would make a polite churchgoer uncomfortable. He demanded an audience with God. He said things no tidy believer is supposed to say. But here's what he never did. He never agreed that his suffering meant he was nothing. he held the line. He kept insisting that he mattered enough to deserve an answer. And in the end, God didn't punish him for the arguing. God rebuked the friends, the ones who'd been so sure they had it all explained, the ones who passed every social test and failed, the only one that counted. I think about that a lot. The people who looked right and sounded right and got it completely wrong. Now let me come back to you and to why I keep speaking to the United Kingdom. There's a particular kind of loneliness in your part of the world. I've noticed it. It's the loneliness of a place that remembers being the center of something. Old churches on every corner, cathedrals that took 300 years to build, a faith that once shaped the whole rhythm of a week. And now those buildings are half empty. Now Sunday is just another day for shopping. Now, if you tell someone you believe God is doing something specific in your life, they'll smile at you the way you'd smile at a child who still believes in something charming and untrue. So, if you're in the UK and you still feel it, that pull, that sense that you were set apart for something, that quiet certainty that won't leave you alone, even when everyone around you has gone cold to the whole idea, then understand what that makes you. It makes you someone holding a candle in a country that has mostly decided the candles are pointless. That's not a small thing. That's the test in its modern form. To keep believing you were chosen in a place that has stopped believing anyone is chosen at all. I don't say this to flatter you. Flattery is cheap, and you've heard enough of it. I say it because it's the observable fact of where you stand. Let me bring in another figure, because I don't want this to float in abstraction. Let me tell you about Elijah. Elijah was a prophet who had just won. I mean genuinely won. He'd stood alone against 450 prophets of a false god, called down fire from heaven in front of a whole nation, and watched the crowd turn back to the living God in a single afternoon. If anybody ever earned a victory lap, it was him. And the very next thing that happens, a woman in power threatens his life, and Elijah runs. He runs into the wilderness, sits down under a tree, and asks God to let him die. "I've had enough," he says. "Take my life. I'm no better than anyone who came before me." Read that carefully. The man who just called down fire wanted to die the next day. The highest moment and the lowest moment separated by a single night. Why does that matter to you? Because it tells you something the motivational people will never tell you. The test doesn't come when you're weak and expecting it. It often comes right after your biggest moment, when you assumed you were finally safe. You think you've passed, and that's exactly when the real exam begins. And look at how God deals with him. No lecture. No, how dare you complain after the miracle I just gave you. God lets him sleep, sends an angel to feed him, lets him sleep again, feeds him again. Only after the man's body and soul have been tended to does God speak, and even then, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, in a low whisper. A still, small voice. I've come to believe most people fail the test simply because they're listening for the wrong volume. They want the earthquake. They want the obvious sign, the undeniable proof, the moment that settles everything. And God keeps speaking in the whisper, and they keep missing it because they've decided in advance what an answer is supposed to sound like. Let me tell you something that happened to me. I don't usually do this, but I think you need to hear it from a person and not just from a story 3,000 years old. There was a stretch of my life, I won't dress it up, where I had decided God had quietly written me off. Things had gone wrong in a way that felt personal, like the failure had my name on it specifically. A job I'd built my whole sense of myself around had come apart, and with it went the people I thought were mine, and the version of the future I'd assumed was waiting for me. I'd wake up early, before light, and just lie there doing the arithmetic of everything that hadn't worked. There's a particular math you do at 4 a.m. when you've decided you're a disappointment. It always adds up the same way. And I did what people do. I went looking for the big sign. I bargained. I said, if this is real, show me. Show me clearly. Show me now. Show me in a way I can't argue with. I wanted the earthquake. I wanted something undeniable that would tell me I still mattered. It never came. Not the way I'd ordered it. What came instead was small. A stranger said one sentence to me on a gray afternoon. I won't even tell you the sentence because it would sound like nothing to you. It would. It was nothing by any normal measure. A few plain words from a man I'd never see again. But it landed in me like a key turning in a lock I'd given up trying to open. And I understood, sitting there, that I'd spent months failing a test by demanding it be administered in a language I'd chosen, on a day I'd selected, in a volume I'd approved. The whisper had been there the whole time. I just thought whispers didn't count. That's the trap. We disqualify the very answers we're being given because they don't arrive with enough thunder. So let me say plainly what this test actually measures, because I don't want you walking away with a feeling instead of an understanding. It measures whether you'll keep your sense of being chosen when there is no external evidence for it. That's all. That's the whole exam. Anyone can feel chosen when life is confirming it, when the money comes, when the door opens, when the prayer gets answered in 3 days flat. That proves nothing. The test is whether the conviction survives the drought, whether you still carry yourself like someone set apart when everything around you is whispering that you're ordinary, forgotten, one of the billions and nothing more. Think about Joseph in that pit. His brothers have stripped him, thrown him in a hole, and are sitting down to eat lunch while they decide whether to kill him or just sell him. There is no evidence in that pit that Joseph is going to be the second most powerful man in Egypt. None. Every visible fact says he's finished. A boy with big dreams, betrayed by his own blood, about to disappear into slavery. And the test for Joseph wasn't the pit. The pit was just pain. The test was the 13 years after it, the slavery, the false accusation, the prison cell where he rotted after doing everything right. The test was whether he'd let those 13 years convince him the dreams were lies. He didn't. And when he finally stood in front of the brothers who'd done it to him, he said something that still stops me cold. He told them, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." He'd been holding that interpretation the entire time, in the dark with no proof. That's a man who passed. Now let me put 2 more men in front of you, because between them they show you the shape of the whole thing. David was anointed king as a boy. A prophet poured oil on his head in front of his own family and named him the next king of Israel. And then, nothing. He went back to the sheep, back to the fields. For years, he ran for his life from the very king he was meant to replace, hiding in caves, sleeping rough, hunted like an animal across the wilderness. Imagine carrying that inside you, knowing you'd been chosen, with the oil practically still in your hair, and spending the next stretch of your life as a fugitive with a price on your head. Every fact of his daily life contradicted the thing he knew to be true about himself. That's the gap. The gap between the anointing and the throne. And almost everything that matters about a person gets decided in that gap, in the long, unglamorous middle, where you've been told who you are, but nothing around you confirms it. David lived in that gap for years and never used his own hands to force the ending. Twice he had the chance to kill the king who was hunting him, and twice he refused. He would not seize by force what he believed God had promised to give. He'd rather wait in the cave than grab the crown dishonestly. That's not weakness. That's a man who trusted the promise more than he trusted his own panic. And then there's Moses, who shows you the other edge of it. Moses spent 40 years in a palace, then 40 years tending sheep in the desert after he ran from everything. And when God finally spoke to him out of a burning bush and told him what he was chosen for, Moses argued. He didn't fall to his knees in gratitude. He made excuses. I'm not a speaker. I stutter. Send somebody else. Send anyone else. I love that, honestly, because it tells you that being chosen doesn't mean feeling qualified. Moses felt completely unqualified. The man who would stand before Pharaoh and part a sea was standing in front of a shrub trying to talk God out of picking him, and he was still the one. The reluctance didn't disqualify him. The arguing didn't disqualify him. God chose him anyway, stutter and excuses and all. So if part of you is sitting there thinking, well, I can't be one of the chosen, I'm too ordinary, I've failed too much, I don't have whatever it is those people have good, you're in excellent company. Moses said the same thing to God's face. It changed nothing about what he was made for. You see, the people who fail aren't bad people. I want to be careful here. The friends of Job weren't villains. Elijah under the tree wasn't a coward. Most people who fail this test fail it out of a kind of reasonable despair. They look at the evidence and they draw the sensible conclusion. The evidence said Job was cursed. The evidence said Joseph was finished. The evidence said David was a fugitive and nothing more. The evidence said Elijah should just lie down and die. Being chosen means refusing to be ruled by the evidence. It means holding an interior fact that the exterior world keeps trying to talk you out of. And that's hard. It's the hardest thing there is, because the world doesn't argue with you once. It argues with you every single morning. You wake up and the same flat, the same bills, the same silence is still there, and the world says, very gently, very reasonably, still think you're special, still? And the test is answered, again, in how you respond to that question on an ordinary Tuesday when nothing is happening and nothing has changed. I'll tell you what I've noticed about the ones who pass. They stop needing the test to end. That's the strange turn. At some point, the chosen stop demanding that God prove it, stop waiting for the season to break, stop measuring their worth by whether the circumstances have finally cooperated. They simply decide that the conviction is true, and they live from it regardless. And the moment a person does that, I've watched this, something shifts. Not always in the circumstances. Often the circumstances stay exactly the same for a while, but something shifts in the person, and the test, in a sense, is already passed, because it no longer has power over them. Ruth did that. A foreign widow, no status, no security, attached to a bitter mother-in-law in a country that wasn't hers. By every measure of her time, she was nobody, the wrong nationality, the wrong gender, the wrong situation, a woman with nothing to offer and no reason to be remembered. And she said the line everyone quotes at weddings without understanding how radical it was, "Your people will be my people, your God my God." She chose. She stepped toward a future with no evidence it would receive her, and she ends up in the bloodline of King David. In the bloodline, the genealogies tell us of Jesus himself. Notice that. The foreigner, the outsider, the one with no claim by birth. God reached past every person who had the right pedigree and put her in the line that mattered most. Because being chosen was never about where you came from. It was always about what you reached toward when you had every reason to turn back. That's why I won't tell you you're chosen because of your country. That would be a lie, and you've been lied to enough. I'll tell you something truer. You might be chosen in your country, set apart in a place that's forgotten how to recognize the set apart, carrying a flame down streets where the lights have mostly gone out. And if that's you, the loneliness you feel isn't a defect. It's the cost. It's what it feels like to be the one still holding the candle. 8 billion people are facing this test, in their own forms, in their own languages, under their own gray skies. Most will read their pain as a verdict. A few scattered, quiet, often lonely, rarely applauded, will read it as something else, as a refining, as a question that deserves an answer rather than a sentence that deserves submission. I think you're one of the few. I don't say that to make you feel good. I say it because people who aren't don't usually make it this far into a conversation like this one. They've clicked away already. They wanted the earthquake. You're still here, in the whisper. That tells me something. So before you go, I want this to become more than a thing you listen to. I want it to become a thing you do. Here's what I'm asking. In the comments, I want you to finish one sentence for me, honestly. Just this. The moment I almost believed the verdict was when, tell me the moment the evidence nearly won, the day the world almost talked you out of yourself. You don't have to tell me how it resolved or whether it has. Just name the moment you came closest to laying down under the tree like Elijah and asking it all to end. Name it. Put it in words where someone else, scrolling at 3 a.m. in a flat somewhere, can read it and realize they're not the only one who almost agreed with the dark. Because that's how the chosen find each other, not in the thunder, in the whisper. One quiet voice saying, "Me too. I almost believed it too, and I'm still here." I'll be reading. Tell me your moment.